Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Dean Speaker Series, co-sponsored by the Goldman School of Public Policy and the Haas Latinx Business Club. I am thrilled to be introducing today's speaker, Rosie Rios, and I'm especially thrilled to welcome her back to campus at the same time that we are celebrating both the momentous milestone of 150 years of women at Berkeley and National Hispanic Heritage Month. We couldn't have a more fitting speaker. Rosie's personal and professional experience is both significant and broad, touching on everything from investing, financial policy, economic and urban development, and education. As the 43rd U.S. Treasurer of the United States, named by President Obama in 2009, she spearheaded efforts to feature a portrait of a woman on U.S. currency, the first initiative to do so in over a century. During the height of the 2008 financial crisis, as a member of the Treasury Federal Reserve Transition Team, she increased U.S. currency production while also boosting employee morale to record levels. Her efforts resulted in saving the U.S. government over $1 billion. After she left office, she had become the longest serving Senate-confirmed Treasury official. She was presented with the Hamilton Award, the highest honor bestowed by the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Rosie Rios' signature currently appears on a world record of 1.69 trillion of US currency out of the 1.71 trillion in circulation. Her personal passion includes serving as founder and CEO of Empowerment 2020, an initiative that promotes the role of American women in history and advocates for women in senior leadership positions. The first project, Teachers Writing History of this initiative, recognizes historical American women in classrooms across the country. She has also launched Notable Women, an augmented reality educational initiative in collaboration with Google. Hot off the press, Rosie just told us that she'll be featured on the Today Show later this month. I think it's October 21st or 22nd. An exemplar of student is continually seeking out new initiatives. She was appointed as a member of America 250, the Congressional Commission to commemorate the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding. She recently concluded a term as a visiting scholar at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard, with a focus on millennials and post-millennials. Prior to her presidential appointment in Treasury, Rosie was Managing Director of Investments for McFarland Partners, a $22 billion real estate management firm based in San Francisco. She graduated from Harvard University and is the first Latina in Harvard's 384-year history to have a portrait commissioned in her honor. Welcome back to Berkeley, Haas, Rosie. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. And now let me turn it over to two of our MBA students, Maritza and Guadalupe Manriquez, who will be leading today's conversation. Take it away.
Great, thank you, Dean Harrison. My name is Maritza Urquiza, and I'm a second-year full-time Haas MBA student, as well as co-president of the Haas Latinx Business Club. And I'll let my co-moderator introduce herself as well.
Thanks, Maritza. My name is Guadalupe Manriquez. I am a second-year full-time student at the Haas School of Business, and I am the Vice President of Finance for the Latinx Business Club.
Thanks, Guadalupe. Before we get started, I also want to remind viewers that they can submit questions at any time through the YouTube chat function. We'll be doing a Q&A at the end of the session. So we want to welcome Rosie. Guadalupe and I are so excited for the opportunity to ask you questions on a range of topics, from economic recoveries to your work around women's issues and being a Latina leader. Before we dive into those topics, how are you doing, Rosie? We would also love to hear about some of your favorite activities that have kept you busy during COVID times.
Thank you so much. I just want to start by saying thank you to Dean Harrison for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate this invitation to be here to join you. I still consider myself an alum of the Haas School of Business, even though I did not technically graduate. I went to go seek the riches of Silicon Valley, but I am thrilled to be back home, if you will. So thank you also to you, Maritza and Guadalupe, for moderating today. So it's been quite busy. I still live in the Bay Area. After 10 years of living in DC, I came back home a couple of years ago. My mom is here in the East Bay. She turned 80, and for me, it was really kind of time to spend some quality time with her. And also, my daughter is now a junior at UC Davis, so I get to kind of come back home and keep very, very busy. So mostly I've been spending my time on a couple of areas. I was working on a very large development project in San Francisco, along with working on my nonprofit Empowerment 2020, and also on the speaking circuit and writing my book. So it's been an interesting journey. I would say the one thing that I would have loved so much in terms of the recent activity is being able to spend some quality time with my kids. And they're both on their own. My son is 24, living in Dallas, works for Goldman Sachs. But to be able to have the quality time that I spent with them when the sheltering in place started was time I never thought I would have with my kids again at that level. So it was wonderful. I'm still keeping very busy today.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Always great to hear of some silver linings during these times. Shifting gears a bit, we wanted to start by hearing your perspective on something top of mind during this pandemic, which is the economy and the path to recovery. As Treasurer of the US, you were part of the team that implemented the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act over a decade ago in response to the Great Recession. What similarities and differences do you see between the Great Recession and the current downturn? And related to that, what fiscal measures do you think would be most effective now in supporting economic recovery?
Yep, that's a perfect question, especially now. I don't think we've ever been faced with these conditions. So let's go back a little bit to the fall of 2008. So yes, I was part of the Treasury Federal Reserve transition team at the height of the financial crisis. You recall that the housing bubble that existed at that time was part of the origin of the challenges that we had back then. And so, markets were pretty frozen. We saw the collapse of Lehman in September of 2008. In October, in fact, October 3rd, Congress passed the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. And so our role as part of this transition team in November of 2008, following the election, we literally started the next day. And so working very closely with the Bush administration under Secretary Paulson and Treasury, the path forward was pretty much set in terms of taking this legislation that Congress had passed to use this as a way to stimulate the economy through financial institutions. So there were a number of programs that were set up at the time to work with providing much more liquidity to the markets. So that was kind of step one. Step two was kind of what you've already mentioned, which was in February of 2009, Congress passed an additional stimulus program called the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And that had a whole number of tools to put to work immediately. So it had the Cash for Clunkers program to help the auto industry. It had the Build America Bonds program, which was kind of an investment in infrastructure for shovel-ready programs across the country. And it also provided tax credits, a lot of tax credits for Main Street to be able to kind of, again, move forward and stimulate the economy with hopefully some growth in GDP. And also, again, just helping Americans kind of have much more confidence moving forward. This economy is very different, extremely different. And I'm just going to call it the COVID economy. So I want to start by giving a little bit of context. So I hope people remember about a year ago, the Federal Reserve issued a report that basically said that 40% of Americans could not afford a $400 emergency that could be paid off, quickly, immediately. So we're already kind of going into this economy with that concern that that people were, you know, $400 away from a huge challenge. So in my opinion, it's just looking at that as the premise of this, and then all the other conditions that were there, you know, student loan debt, et cetera, household debt, et cetera. Where are those people today? So that's what concerns me is, and I think if I were to summarize it, it would be the 2008, 2009 crisis is really, you know, again, the origins of housing. I think this crisis is the origin of our home, as in our living, as in our way of life. If that many people are vulnerable, the process moving forward to trying to tackle that is going to be much, much different. And again, I see this much more today as a Main Street issue versus a financial institution issue.
Got it. Well, thank you for that. Definitely a lot of challenges moving forward. In addition to your economic recovery efforts, one of your major initiatives during your tenure as treasurer was leading efforts to put a portrait of a woman on Federal Reserve notes. Can you tell us about your inspiration was for that effort and what you learned from the experience?
Yeah, so that is obviously you know, one of the projects that I'm most proud of. But just again, kind of taking you back to how that started. Well, what really happened was actually during the transition team in December of 2008. So here I was on this team. Going back, it was such a fog because it was so much work and it was a scary time. The house was on fire, literally. And so I would take my breaks where I could. And I came across a historical resource center at Treasury. And the Historical Resource Center is where they kept all the archived items of all the financial products that the Treasury ever produced. So it wasn't just currency, it was savings bonds, military payment certificates, you know, the security page of your passport, which they still produce. It was postage stamps. It was all these great things that were literally kind of, you know, archived in an area that the public did not have access to. And so I would kind of, you know, take my little breaks there and I'd pour through these amazing documents and renderings. And if you look in all those items that I mentioned, you know, passports, military payment certificates, savings bonds, money, et cetera, there are all these kind of great concepts, these drawings that were included on the design of all these items. As I'm pouring through this, I kind of noticed a pattern. It's kind of weird, but every single image that I came across of a woman was not a real woman. They were, you know, allegorical figures like Lady Liberty types, you know, sometimes clothed and sometimes unclothed. But every single image that I came across of a man was a real man, a founding father, a president, a cabinet member. And so when I started looking, you know, doing a little bit more homework, looking at our currency, looking at currency around the world, I realized that we've never had the portrait of a woman on our Federal Reserve notes in the history of our country. Yet at that time, there were almost 30 countries who had women on their modern day currency. And I just thought it was strange. So I asked the Bureau of Engraving and Printing Director, where our money is printed, why this has happened. And I asked his deputy, the three of them, the same question, why we've never done this before. And between the three of them, they had like 100 years, seriously, 100 years working at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing collectively. But they all gave me the same answer separately, which is no one's ever brought it up. I just thought that was fascinating. And so when I became one of the 7 people who was recommended for a permanent appointment on this transition team, I knew that this was a project that was going to be impactful, historical, not just for my daughter, but for my son. And so I cobbled together my portfolio specifically to work on this project and see it through. And it was worth every second. If tomorrow was day 1 of 2008 all over again on the transition team, I would do it again. It was well worth it.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And we have more questions around your work around women's issues, but I'll hand it over to Guadalupe to continue asking some questions.
Thanks, Maritza. And just a quick reminder for everyone to please add your questions on the YouTube chat. We'll be getting to those at about 1:20. So thank you, Rosie. I'm very grateful for all of your work and dedication to putting a portrait of a woman on a currency, and applaud you for questioning the status quo. So after your work as treasurer, you continued your leadership around the recognition of women, and in particular, the importance of women being represented in physical spaces. Can you tell us about Empowerment 2020 and your work in this area?
Absolutely, and thank you, Guadalupe, for that question. By the way, that's my mom's name, fabulous name. So for me, you know, I call myself an accidental historian, accidental educator, accidental feminist. I never quite realized what was missing until you kind of have that, you know, that trigger, that wake-up call, and certainly the currency design process was part of that wake-up call. And so for me, I knew that it wasn't just about currency. Currency is obviously a way that we institutionalize our history, right? It's globally. And so in that big question of if you're missing half the population on representing your history, you know, what does that mean? What does that say? And so along the way, you know, I realized that women in our history are missing pretty much everywhere in terms of what we see. And so I started Empowerment 2020 as a visiting scholar during my time at Harvard to really kind of flesh this out a little bit more in terms of what that meant, to physically recognize historical American women. And is there this correlation between visibility and value that we might be missing? And so the premise is this. So you know what unconscious bias is. So unconscious bias is when you don't realize that you're being influenced by something you're exposed to. My theory is, could it be that we're being influenced, that we're not aware that we're being influenced by something we're not exposed to? And the answer is yes, of course, right? You've heard the motto, if you can see it, you could be it. Or even the definition of a role model, right? The definition of a role model is someone you aspire to be, someone you know, someone you see. And so that concept of this physical recognition was very, very important to me. You know, it kind of comes down to, you know, we value what we see every day, but do we see what we value? And so when we did the currency design process, we launched in June of 2015, this public engagement process where we'd solicit feedback from the American public on who should be considered for our currency. Never happened before, ever in the history of our country, that we would solicit that type of feedback through social media. So it was Facebook, it was Twitter, it was Instagram. We also had, you know, emails, letters, and I personally embarked on this very aggressive kind of town hall process where I went all over the country asking folks, you know, at schools and every kind of public forum that I could, who should be considered. And what I realized in that process is three things actually, not always fun. There was a lot of hate out there. There was a lot of hate. This is 2015. The second thing I realized is how little our country knows about its history, how little the public knows about its history. And third, how much less they know about women in history. And so what I did when we made the announcement in April 2016 of Harriet Tubman on the 20, I also made sure that that information that we aggregated during that almost 1 year process of historical American women should also be part of that announcement. So this database that we created of almost 300 historical American women was posted on Treasury's website. I didn't want it to be just about one woman or 10 women, but the hundreds of women who've been overlooked in our history. And so we posted that database on our website, and that really became the basis of what I do today. But something else happened during that time that also really impacted me. And it was August 17th, 2015. So we're in the midst of this public engagement process, and I got an email from my high school history teacher, Mr. Wilder. By the way, he just retired after like 38 years at my high school. But he sent me this email. He wanted to congratulate me. He saw me on CNN talking about the currency design process. He wanted to congratulate me, but he also wanted to thank me. He said at that time, and I took his class at that time, like, 34 years ago, but he said that he wanted to thank me because he said that day, August 17, 2015, was the first day of his school year teaching American history in the same classroom, Emerald High School in Hayward, California. And he said he walked into the classroom and realized that after, at that time, 36 years of teaching American history, he had never had the image of a woman on his classroom wall. It just never dawned on him. And so he salt of the earth, wasn't a deliberate omission. It's just something that he wasn't thinking about, almost similar to the answers that I received about our currency. So he said he wanted to change it, and he did. He invited me back that fall. I walked into the same classroom that I did from 30 some odd years before, and there on the classroom walls he put he had Harriet Tubman, he had Susan B. Anthony, and he had me. It was very cute. But it dawned on me when I walked in that classroom, if one teacher or 100 teachers or 1,000 teachers did this, do you imagine what that does for not just for our girls, but for our boys, right? It normalizes how we see and value our history and value our full population. And so when I left the administration in 2016, one of the first things I did is I launched my first educational initiative with my high school teacher at my high school called Teachers Writing History, RIGHT. And it's taken the same database and we put public images in there and taking that database and integrating it into the classroom. And it really took off very, very quickly. It was a lot of fun, but I knew I was onto something. And it was also, during that time, again, when you're kind of awake, someone asked me recently, what's your superpower? And my answer was, it was like instinctual. My answer was, I can see the invisible. It's amazing what happens when you're awake and you look around and you know what's missing and you see what's missing everywhere. And so it was something that I realized when I was in DC, kind of walking around DC. Of course, again, that's another way that we institutionalize our history, where people come from all over the world to see what we value and whom we value. And one day I realized, again, kind of trigger, boom, walking around, that I couldn't find very many, if at all, statues of real American women. Again, a lot of allegorical women, lots of, women warrior liberties, etc. But I ended up, ready for this? I did my homework, and there's only, ready for this? Two statues of real women outdoors in the public domain in our nation's capital. So the two are Eleanor Roosevelt at her husband's memorial and Mary McLeod Bethune at Lincoln Park. That's it. That's it for our nation's capital. So just for fun, I did this research in a weekend. I looked at the top 10 cities by population. And I did it by population because critical mass is very, very key. So I looked at their downtowns or main parks of the top 10 cities. I added in DC, our nation's capital, and my hometown in San Francisco. So of those 12 cities combined outdoors in the public domain, either in their downtown or main parks, they're less than half a dozen total. So that was kind of another thing that I really wanted to tackle. And to make a long story short, I remember talking about this, and a woman came up to me afterwards and she says, oh my God, that thing about statues, this is crazy. She says, you need to come meet with our CEO, need to meet with our foundation. They need to hear this, because she was from New York Life Insurance. And New York, one of the examples that I gave for New York, in Central Park is one of the most visited urban parks in the world, over 40 million visitors a year. But in Central Park at that time, 2016, they had, there's 22, 23 statues of real people in Central Juliet, from Romeo and Juliet. So if you walk out of the Plaza Hotel, you turn left, you're facing Central Park, you'll see Commander Sherman, you'll see Jose Marti, you'll see Simone Bolivar, all on their high horses. All the international conquistadors are well represented, no women. And so New York Life's announcement of $500,000 in the first ever female statue in Central Park. I was at the unveiling this last August 26th. My daughter, of course, joined me. It wasn't obviously the huge event that it was envisioned because of COVID, but we were the only ones seated near Hillary Clinton. It was amazing. And so, yes, they unveiled the statue, which was Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth underway by 2026, which is the 250th anniversary of our nation's founding. So the way I think about this is not his story or her story, it's our story. And so I launched Empowerment 2020 to include these initiatives, the physical recognition of historical American women, while as a visiting scholar at Harvard. And so my statue initiative is study of this correlation, again, between visibility and value. I think the big takeaway from that is what started out as a gender initiative as a visiting scholar actually morphed into a focus on millennials and post-millennials, because I realized that it's not just a gender initiative, it's a future leadership initiative. And I find your generation of millennials and post-millennials, basically anyone, the way I think of it, anyone that was born in the mid-90s, grew up with the internet. And so your access to information is very, very different. Your view of the world is very, very different. And so the world is very flat to you. It's no longer who's sitting next to you. It's people in Russia, people in India. You have a very global perspective, and so the world is very flat to you. And so it's no longer what you're taught at home or what you're taught in the classroom. It's what you see. It's what you learn. And so your view of the world is very different than my generation. And so you see people as people. It's very, very important. It's not one or the other. It's all of it. And so I wanted to kind of get into your heads a little bit more. And my daughter, who's 20, and my son, who's 24, I mean, those are the demographics that I feel like I'm an expert in now. And again, kind of understanding what you feel, what you think, how you view culture, how you view people is very important to me. So I spent 2 years focusing on that.
Great, thank you, Rosie. That's incredibly powerful, and I agree. Representation is so important, particularly as you're thinking about who the role models are and who you're striving to be. So thank you for all of those efforts. And you started talking about how Empowerment 2020 is shifting to more of an intergenerational initiative. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what your goals are there? And also, what do you think are the strengths and opportunities for millennials to create change?
Oh, yes. All right. So my favorite question, absolutely my favorite question. So let me, if you look at a typical profile of a millennial or post-millennial, and by the way, Gen Z basically just turned 22 this last year. So graduating from college. And so if you look at a typical profile of a millennial and post-millennial, they are, they're passionate, they're confident, they are very, much smarter in terms of knowledge, in terms of having access to information than the previous generations. They're very progressive, and they want to do something. They definitely want to do something, but they're just not quite sure how to do it. And so you kind of default to previous generations. But what I love about these generations is that they definitely are action oriented. They're done with the talk. They want to do something so important. And I guess the way I think about, it's not a binary world for you. Optionality is key. Flexibility is key. And again, seeing people for people is very, very important. I think probably the way I have a great story that I think kind of captures that feeling, which is when I was reading my son's college application essays. And it's amazing what you learn about your kids when they have the opportunity to write about themselves personally. And so I'll never forget this one essay that he titled A Tale of Two Grandmas. It was so cute. He starts up by saying, "I am Joey." And he goes on about his grandmother from Hokkaido, Japan, and his grandmother from Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. And he never talks about their differences, but he talks about how they both raised them with the common values of family, food, faith, and unconditional love. And he ends the essay with, "I am Joey." Right? He's not one or the other. He's all of it. He doesn't want to be defined by one or the other. He's a very proud Latino, and he's also a very proud Japanese gentleman. And he's also a very proud, Catholic, and he's a very proud everything, but he doesn't want to have these borders, boxes, and boundaries that previous generations like to check. And so that really kind of sparked my interest a lot into really kind of understanding what that means. And my daughter was kind of the same way, but in a different way. She was a tomboy growing up. There's a 4-year age difference between the two. She definitely wanted to be Joey. And so she played his sports, she wore his clothes, and I never thought twice. It never dawned on me that she should be anyone else but herself. And, she was the only girl in the Castro Valley Boys Little League before we moved to DC. We couldn't find a baseball team that would accept her at her age and her level. So she gave up baseball and started playing basketball. And so, for her, the ability to make her choices based on her passion was really something. And I saw her really grow into it. She was a very tiny person, and she ended up working so hard at basketball, where normally height is a huge advantage. But what did she do? She ended up developing this amazing three-point shot that she ended up holding the record, for most three-point shots in a game at her. Owned it. And it was really important for us to really nurture that, let her be who she is and find her own voice. And so for me, those are two examples. There's a million examples I can give you of young adults like that I've met along the way, thousands of them that I've had a chance to interview and understand what's important. And what I see, what's important to you, you're much more, you're less about institutionalized religion. You're more about spirituality. You are less about, we versus they. You're more about us. What previous generations might be more judgmental about when it comes to race or gender or orientation. That type of judgment doesn't really play a role. And so, it literally, again, I have so many triggers, these aha moments in my life, but literally by having to and studying these generations, I realized, my gosh, I want to think like that. I want to be like that. When I grew up, I want to be my daughter. I keep saying that over and over and over again, because I think that open mind and getting out of our boxes is so important. And I think, I don't think you can just kind of, conclude that these are issues of just race or just issues of orientation. I think these are all cultural issues. And we all have our own kind of cultural perspectives, right? When I think about it as, the way I define culture is all the threads of our community, all of it, race, gender, orientation, religion, et cetera, that make up the fabric of our community. And so it's a very, very kind of subjective approach. And I feel like I'm putting all my eggs in your generation's basket in terms of what I think needs to happen to bring this collective voice to our country that really, really needs it. I think the only challenge for your many challenges, you poor thing, student debt, too many things. But I think the challenge, and I guess the red flag that I see is that your generations, and again, for now I'm focusing on Gen Z and a little bit at the end of Gen Y, is you're not coming out to vote in droves, which I think is unfortunate. And that's probably a sad reflection on not believing in our government institutions, which is tough. I mean, we obviously need to do a better job of engaging you and giving you purpose to come out and vote.
Thank you, Rosie. I appreciate the touching story of Joey. And as a point guard myself, I can totally relate to your daughter.
That was a position.
So sort of on that note, what advice do you have for millennials? You sort of mentioned the challenge with institutions and voting. Any other pieces of advice that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think it's the same advice I give my kids. Finding your passion is hard. It's hard. And truthfully, I didn't find my passion until I was 43 years old. It took me a while. So if you would have known me, before I came into the administration, I'm a different person. I'm a completely different person. It's amazing what happens when you're awake. And so I would say that finding your passion and purpose is so important, but you need to give it time. You really do. And part of that is doing your homework. I hate to say that, do your homework, but it is kind of true. Understanding the issues is so important. And I got to tell you, trying to bring it back to business school, my first job out of college was as a commercial property underwriter for General Reinsurance. Love that job. I was there for 2 years before I started at the Haas School of Business. But what I learned in terms of how to analyze, now I'm an analyst, I call myself an analyst by trade, how you look at an investment or a project or a program, the process, the rigorous process that you go through for any type of analysis is the same thing that I still use today for everything. And so, when I think about it, kind of make it very basic, existing conditions, case study, precedent, analysis, recommendation, implementation, that exact same process I use for everything. So for all of you who think, how is this going to come in handy? What am I ever going to use this for? How do you train your mind to be in that due diligence mindset? I'm telling you, it's the best thing, one of the best things that's ever happened to me, because again, that very thorough, deliberate thoughtful process of how to get to anything that you're trying to work on, whether it is a personal passion or a work project, etc., is so important, so key. And so for all of you, I would say my recommendation to all of you is, first of all, you are here because you've already invested in yourself, right? To go through what you had to go through in high school, in college, and now in graduate school. Investing in yourself, best thing, first and foremost. But there's other pieces to this. Investing in yourself kind of, systematically is great, but investing in yourself in what I call the third dimension, the kind of the emotional awareness piece, is just as important. And so the one thing I noticed about, these next generations is the anxiety is real. I can't imagine what it would be like from your vantage point to have to go through what you have to go through in terms of what you've been saddled with, again, whether it's student debt, whether it is, the challenges, the burdens of social media. I can't stand that stuff. I really can't. I stay away from it for the most part, and I try to encourage my kids to do the same. But it's hard. I know it's hard because there is this pressure, this peer pressure. But that takes a toll on you emotionally, mentally. And asking for help should never be stigmatized. Everyone, I mean everyone, needs an extra boost of whatever it is, whether it's counseling, therapy, peer assistance, colleague assistance, professor assistance, whatever you want to call it. Finding those champions is a key part of it, your family, et cetera, your friends. And we should not think that there's anything wrong with asking for help, really. And we as a country need to do a much better job of being proactive and finding those opportunities to institutionalize what it means to have resources, those types of resources available. I'll give you a great example. When I was officially nominated for treasurer in May of 2009, my daughter was 8, my son was 12. Not exactly the best time to rip your kids out of the only house they've ever known, the only school they've ever known, the only bed they've ever known. And so I found this amazing child psychologist in Berkeley, Susan Regan, and I took my kids there for the full 4 months until we physically moved to DC. And it was the best thing I ever did. And, did I think there was something wrong? No, but I wanted to preempt what could have been wrong, right? To be able to acclimate to a new environment at such a young age. And what she did is she provided kind of the tools for me to be able to recognize whether or not they were acclimating, right? So did the eating patterns change? Did their social behaviors change? How were they performing academically, et cetera? So it was kind of a preemptive way to really think about the resources that they would need to be able to move and do what they needed to do, emotionally and fully. So again, one of the best things I ever did. So for your generation, I would say, and especially for my generation, provide those resources proactively. And if you don't feel like you're getting them, please ask every step of the way.
Thanks, Rosie. That's very helpful advice for us as just human beings and future leaders. So switching gears a little bit. So we're currently celebrating National Latinx Heritage Month, a month where we recognize Latinx leaders and their contributions to American society. So Dean Harrison mentioned that your portrait was the first portrait of a Latina to be commissioned at Harvard College. So as a first generation Mexican American from the Bay Area, what did this moment mean to you and your family? And what message do you want to send to listeners from underrepresented backgrounds?
Yeah, it's funny when people ask me that question about how does it feel to be the first, or how's it, aren't you, oh my God, you're so, isn't it great to be the only, blah, blah, blah. It's actually kind of a sad question to me because I don't want to be the first. And I certainly don't want to be the only. And it does kind of, as proud as I am to be part of the Latinx community, as proud as I was at the portrait unveiling, which was about a year ago, actually coincided with my son graduating from Harvard. So it was actually amazing. So we had the ceremony, the commencement, and then the next day was the portrait unveiling. So it was kind of surreal to be there with all my friends and family who came in for the graduation, but who also came in for the portrait unveiling. And it now, my portrait is at Winthrop House which is where I was as an undergraduate. It's in the common room, and it's overwhelming. It is. It's overwhelming to have that honor, and at the same time know that my son and my daughter still have and will continue to have their own struggles as Latinx individuals. And I say that because we have so much more to go. And so, when I talk about 51% of the population for women, I talk about it in that way because 51% is a majority, right? And so again, for me, it's not just about gender, it's a future leadership issue. And so if you're marginalizing 51% of the population, what does that mean for future leadership? If 51% of the population were left-handed Lithuanians, that's who I'd be advocating for. Because again, when you think about it that way, it becomes an equity issue. But when you put it in the context of the Latinx community, it's very sad for me that we still don't have a voice. We're not even close. And so, I'll give you some examples. I mean, when I was on the transition team in the fall of 2008, if I recall correctly, I was the only Latina in all the economic agencies on the transition team. And coming into Treasury, I was the first woman confirmed in Treasury. I was the only woman confirmed in Treasury in all of 2009, during one of the most consequential times of our economic history. When you throw in ethnicity, when you throw in, how many Latinx people were in senior positions, we're not even a rounding error. So when you talk about the glass ceiling for women, for the Latinx community, it's a glass wall. We're not even in the building, much less in the room. So it's sad for me. It is. And so that also inspires me. It also galvanizes me in a different way to really be much more intentional. And so I'll give you some great examples. When we aggregated that currency redesigned public engagement database, and I realized before we launched Teachers Writing History, there was not one Latina on that database. So I added them, right? It's my list, I'm going to add it. So again, you have to be very, very, very thoughtful, very intentional. And it's hard. It is. It's, you burn a few bridges perhaps along the way. When you're that on and that aware, you see invisibility everywhere, and you kind of want to fix it all. And it is a little bit of a load. It's a big load to carry, but it's so worth it. It's so worth it. And so when you look at, my other initiative, which is kind of what I call Women, Money, and Power, women in positions of money and power. So specifically women on corporate boards, women in the C-suite, when you look at those metrics, it is dismal. Women unfortunately tend to flatline at 20% in every major economic and political indicator. When you break it down even more so in terms of the Latinx community, again, hardly. So I hardly even say it's single digits. It's sad. It's very, very sad. And so, unfortunately, money and power is what influences people. And so if we are not in positions of money and power, unfortunately, we don't have a voice. But the reality is, numbers don't lie. This is why I love talking to business school students, because they get the numbers. They get the numbers. We will be majority minority in this country by 2045. So it could very well be that all of our kids may not look like us, right? My kids are half Asian. It's funny how people usually think I'm the nanny. I'm not kidding. But the reality is our country is changing. And we have over 55 million Latinos, Latinx community in the US, 35 million or so Mexicans, very proud. And so for me, it's the train has already left the station. The numbers are the numbers. It's not like we are going to change. We have changed. We just haven't recognized what that collective voice is and how that translates into a collective power. And it's, it is about disposable income. It is about our vote. It is about what we need to do to be heard and to be seen. And so for me, to be seen is key, because again, how does that influence this next generation of leadership? So how do you find those leaders? How do you inspire those leaders? How do you create those leaders? And how do you take those leaders to that next step? And so that, that for me, that Women, Money, and Power initiative is just as important as my physical recognition of historical American women. Very, very important.
Thank you for sharing that, Rosie. I think, this concept of being heard and being seen really, hits me. And I think, as part of, your portrait being commissioned, it's so powerful to see the accomplishments of those that came before us. Because I think for us, it serves an inspiration to continue doing the work for those that are coming down the pipeline. So thank you. I really appreciate that perspective. And yes, thank you so much, Rosie. I'm going to pass it on to Maritza now to our Q&A from the audience.
Ooh.
Okay, well, we have some great questions from the audience. So this first one, I think, really speaks to the audience because we have a good combo of business students and policy students, and this merges both of those groups. In addition to racial and gender inequality, there is a lot of income inequality in the US. In your opinion, what fiscal and monetary policy can fight this? And what can corporations do to help?
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, no, this is a great question. So it really speaks to, I think, the last part of your question, what businesses, what the federal government, none of this is going to be solved by one or the other. These public-private partnerships are so key. And it's not just about money. It's not just about infusing a ton of money and throwing a lot of money and thinking that's going to be it. I mean, unfortunately, our debt has never been higher in this country. And so just assuming that if you throw a lot of money at something, it's going to fix it. That's not the case at all. Again, being thoughtful and deliberate and extremely targeted is going to be key. I think any type of stimulus that's going to happen, and there will be more stimulus no matter what happens with the November election. There will be more stimulus. I think jumpstarting the economy at the base level is important. And so yes, the $1,200 stimulus checks, I think, really helped a lot of people. There might be another round of that, but it's also more than that. In the end, it is about jobs, and jobs. And so the way I think about what happened, between 2008, and the following 8 years, what people wouldn't realize is that the economy was buoyed by a number of initiatives. And so, the monetary policy initiatives that were in place, the Federal Reserve, what the Federal Reserve did, even, all the way back in the beginning of 2008, with what they did, obviously Bear Stearns saw its collapse, of a few other folks. And so the Federal Reserve kind of stepping in, the quantitative easing programs that happened were so key. Today on the monetary policy side, which again, that is a central bank purview, that is not the Treasury purview. Treasury is fiscal policy. On the monetary policy side, it's hard to imagine our interest rates getting much lower. So I think that's going to probably, I don't think that's a secret. I think it's probably going to stay for a while. Inflation is always the biggest concern for the Federal Reserve. That doesn't, again, that's still in the back of their minds, but interestingly enough, they've changed some of their metrics recently, which is going to be, again, I think we're all going to see these low interest rates for a while. On the fiscal side, again, I keep talking about jobs. I think there's going to be a couple things that I think are going to happen regardless, which is likely going to be a huge investment in infrastructure. And it's probably going to be similar to what we did with the Build America Bonds program, maybe a little bit more aggressive. That's going to look at roads, public transportation projects, et cetera. I think that's going to be key. Again, those are jobs, those are real jobs. But I think another area that I think is going to be looked at very, very strongly is what you can do to help people in terms of their skill sets. So I'm a huge, huge believer in upskilling, cross-skilling, and tech skilling. And so upskilling is obviously more training and development to do better at what you can do. Cross-skilling is obviously, you know, what probably similar to what you're doing now, but maybe there's another industry that has something that you can transfer to, that has similar skill sets, you know, and tech skilling. I think we all need tech skilling. And the beauty of your generation is it's very intuitive. You all grew up with it. You all just kind of plug and play. I still have to, I don't know why, but, you know, I still have to ask my daughter to set things up for me. She can fix a vacuum like you could never imagine. But it's amazing how adept your generation is. It's just getting your hands in there and being able to absorb information in a much different way than my generation. And so, you know, I do remember when even my first year at Harvard, we had to take a class in basic. We had to literally pass before we actually started our curriculum. We had to take this programming test in basic. And I kind of wonder, like, what happened? Because that was a long time ago. That was like, I'm afraid to say, 35 years ago or so. So I'm a little surprised that that type of mandatory programming didn't really continue in the same way, and became so widespread. And so, you know, with what happened in the previous administration, 2008. I mean, think about what happened back then. The iPhone came out in 2007, right? And so you had this huge start of these tech jobs that really buoyed the economy in ways that no one saw coming, right? And so, you know, the Facebook and Googles and Twitters of the world just kind of exploded, right? And for better or for worse in terms of, you know, what it did for social media, kind of how you all are into social media. But at the same time, you know, what does that mean for those who are left behind? What does that mean for those who don't have access to the internet? What does that mean for those who don't have access to a laptop? What does it mean for those? It just shocks me that we are just now, because of COVID, getting to the point where we are actually doing something in neighborhoods that didn't have internet access, or these kids that didn't have laptops that couldn't learn online in addition to their schoolwork. So now they're forced to do it because, but can you imagine how hard it would be if you're not used to it, if you don't know how to work a laptop, how you don't know how to surf the internet, and you don't know how to really be comfortable with online learning, and you're doing it for the first time. It is so sad to me that never came up before. Again, here's where I get sad again, right? And so you think, my gosh, how do you not see that coming? That we still have large swaths of the country, a lot of our community members who still don't have access. How could that be? So I do think this tech skilling that I love to talk about all the time is going to be and should be a key part of any stimulus moving forward. And that also, you know, if you think about kind of the Gen Xers of the world who probably still didn't have, you know, those manufacturing jobs, you know, are not going to come back the way we thought they were going to come back. You're not going to work for that same company for 30 years the way you thought so before. And so what do you do with folks, again, who don't have those skill sets in the first place? And so I would love to see a huge investment in those areas, again, of what it means to refine your skills, gain new skills, cross your skills over, and especially, again, those tech skills that I think we're still sorely missing as a country.
Yeah, definitely. So we have another question, shifting gears to representation of women. So Eric asks, what is your opinion of state laws which require a percentage of women on the board of directors of publicly held companies? Is it too far, or is it just necessary fairness?
Oh, that's such a great question, and a little bit of a loaded question, only because, again, no matter what answer you have to this, people are very much in one camp versus the other. I'm not the biggest fan of set quotas. Only because, look, you know, my champion in Treasury was Secretary Geithner, Tim Geithner. And I was so fortunate to have him as that champion, because everything that I took to him, I wouldn't take something to him unless I knew I did my homework. And I tried to take all the no's off the table in advance as I thought about these projects. But he was very, very supportive. And so for me, when it comes to women, especially in women's issues, if women are relegated to kind of the generic 20% of decision making, you still need the 80% in order to make any structural changes. So I don't see the solutions as just being women to women. That's not how things are going to happen. That's why, in my opinion, why we kind of stayed at 20% for so long. It's been that way forever. And actually, I don't really see those numbers changing all that much. So on one hand, you know, getting to that 30% number that people say is that tipping point, and that's where things happen, I think that would be great. The danger of anything like that is, will you get people who are just happy to be there, or you'll just, you know, or get people who actually want to make a difference? So the way I think about it, I would much rather have one Tim Geithner than 10 people who are just happy to be there. Boy, does change happen when you have someone who really gets it. And so again, the beauty of me focusing on 51% of the population, where I usually am very, very effective, are with fathers. It's amazing what happens when you're talking to a CEO and you kind of lay out this case that you know, if things don't change, your daughter is going to be, you know, she'll be lucky if she's part of that 20%. And it's amazing if people, you know, when people respond to that, it's literally like the first time they think, oh no, my daughter will never have to face that. What? It's like it dawns on them, and it could be your daughter or your wife or your sister or whoever. Believe me, we have all been in those situations where we felt marginalized, where we didn't feel valued. We've all felt it, every single one of us. The thought that your daughter's going to feel that, boy, does that change the mix, right? Or again, when I think about the world being, the US being majority minority in 2045, train's already left the station, you're not going to stop it. So the world's going to change whether you like it or not. So there is kind of this business case, right, on why we need to do this, whether it is a consumer issue, whether it is a political issue, you know, whatever it is, the critical mass. There is a case study for this on why it needs to happen. So again, I am very supportive of this awareness that the changes have to happen. And if these states, California is one of them, right? It's not just for gender, it's also for diversity in corporate boards as well in California. I think what it does is it starts a much needed conversation that didn't happen before. And if these states mandate these levels, I only hope that at the corporate level, that as these conversations continue at the corporate level, that these CEOs and these C-suites, as they look at their own boards, that level of diversity of thought starts at the top. We shouldn't be doing this because we want to check a box. We should be doing it because we're going to go out and be very deliberate and thoughtful of casting a very wide net of talent. And all things being considered, absolutely, let's make those deliberate choices. So that's what I think is the beauty of what's happening, is that these conversations never happened before. And I really, really hope that so it's not just about legislation. Believe me, right? We all know that even with the passage of the 15th Amendment or the passage of the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote, that how it was implemented, right? It wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that really, you know, really opened the doors for everyone to vote. So it's not just about the legislation. It's how it's implemented and how it's enforced that's going to be very, very key. So I only hope that at the state level, as these initiatives come forward and pass, I am extremely, extremely looking to those corporations, those CEOs, those C-suite members to say, we are absolutely going to cast that wide net and get the best talent possible.
Thank you, Rosie. And thank you so much for being a leader and driving these conversations. Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have. That was fast. On behalf of Dean Harrison, the Goldman School of Public Policy, and the Latinx Business Club, thank you so much, Rosie, for joining us today and sharing your insights and experiences. And thank you to all the viewers for joining this Dean Speaker Series, and we hope you all have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Dean Harrison, Guadalupe, Maritza, Sarah, Mel, Meg, all these people who were great in putting this together. You guys did a fabulous job. Thank you to all of you.